Ladies and gentlemen, this is my favorite division preview of the entire offseason. We are heading into the AFC East, and the reason why I say it's my favorite because obviously I'm biased as a Patriot fan. But welcome back to another episode of the Collin O'Callahan Show. It's your host, Collin O'Callahan. I really need to have a better intro than that. You know what? I'm just going to stop wasting time, just like Jerry Jones tried to double down on the Micah Parsons, contract holdout and the trade request. Let's start with the Buffalo Bills, who are division champions for the fifth time in a row, trying to get their sixth year in a row under their belt. It all started in 2020, obviously. There was the year after Tom Brady left to go join the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And Buffalo ended up surging its way to the top with a 13-3 record. That was the year they acquired Stephon Diggs. That's when their defense really got, healthy and stable, and, a foundation was set on both sides of the ball. And now when you fast forward 5 years later, and yet they still have yet to win a Lombardi trophy. They're always this close to getting there, but they always run into the boogeyman known as Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. This year, they are the team to be featured on this year's Hard Knocks. It's an awesome show, by the way. If you haven't been paying attention to it, I would suggest you to watch it right now. It is on HBO Max for those of you who do not know. And this season has been it's actually been really good. It's hard to not like this team at all. But the thing with Hard Knocks and being the team featured on it is that any team that's featured on it, whether it's, the offseason or training camp or the regular season one, they have yet to win a Lombardi trophy. There have only been a few teams that have made the playoffs after being featured on Hard Knocks, and only one of them got to the conference championship game, and that was the 2010 New York Jets before ultimately losing to Pittsburgh. If you look at the rest of this list, it doesn't really look so good, does it? I mean, 2001 Ravens, the best one yet, but got sent home in the second round by Pittsburgh. The 2013 Bengals lost in the first round. Same thing with the 2015 Houston Texans. 2020 Rams, they got sent home in the second round. Same thing with the Cowboys. Lions barely missed the playoffs. The Jets, we don't really need to talk about them. Giants, more or less the same thing. And then the Bears, they only won 5 games after being, one of the most hyped up teams to make the playoffs. But the Buffalo Bills are the one team that is just trying to end that negative narrative and to create more positive ones on their own, especially now since, they're favored to win the AFC or be one of the top 2 teams to win the conference, I should say. And there's one big reason why, and that is because of this man right here, Josh Allen. Won his first MVP last year, got a huge contract extension as a result. I don't think it made him the highest paid quarterback. I think that still belongs to Dak Prescott, but it's still somewhere around the block. Last year, he threw 28 touchdown passes, only 6 interceptions, also ran for 12 on the ground. And the funny thing was, he didn't even throw for 4,000 yards. And a big reason why is because if you look at the wide receivers on this list and the ones that he had last year, it was a pretty mediocre bunch, but you still got quality production. I mean, Khalil Shakir more than proved to be the number one option on this football team, caught 76 passes for 821 yards. He led the team in targets by 25, which is outright surprising considering they have a first-round pick in Keon Coleman or actually, first round pick. He's a high second round pick. But the point is, he's the guy that, was expected to jump into that role. And he didn't have too bad a year. Total of 556 yards on just 29 catches, only 4 touchdown receptions. But I'm expecting him to have a little bit of a better season. Maybe not 1,000 yards quite yet, but somewhere in the 700 to 800 range. They signed Josh Palmer and Elijah Moore as reliable depth options. Still kept Curtis Samuel, Tyrell Shavers rising up the ranks. KJ Hamler, if you haven't been watching Hard Knocks, big fan of the scooter and caught a huge touchdown against the Giants in the 34-25 loss, which is unfortunate. But this offense is more or less going to be the same. You still got Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox as the 2 tight ends. Didn't put up godly numbers, but, they're still a capable unit, and Josh Allen is going to utilize them no matter what. But the biggest win for the Bills offense was bringing James Cook back on a 4-year, $48 million contract extension. So he finally got paid. The hold-in is over, and now he is still going to be – he's pretty much going to be the focal point of that Bills running attack as he's been for the last few years. And without him, it is nowhere near the same. Ray Davis is good. I like Ty Johnson, but they're not James Cook because last year Cook totaled just over 1,000 yards. He led the league with 16 touchdowns and averaged 4.9 yards a carry. So he was 1/10 short of 5 yards a clip, which is flat out remarkable. And the offensive line here is, the best O-line in football. It gave up the fewest sacks. They brought Deion Dawkins back on a contract extension, and rightfully so. Spencer Brown has more than developed into a surefire blue chip starting right tackle. Osiris Torrance, entering his third or fourth season as the starting right guard. You got McGovern at center. You drafted Jacob Bayer in the second round or the third round. So he might elevate his way to being the backup center, when that time comes. And then you got David Edwards at left guard. So offensively, with Joe Brady on charge, you're not really expecting, a bit of a regression. I think it's going to be all right as long as Josh Allen's fully healthy and as long as he's the one under center. There's no doubt that they're going to be the favorites to win the division, and they will be one of the top two threats to beat the Kansas City Chiefs. But that's the problem. The amount of, outstanding performances that we've seen from Josh Allen in those games, that team just always finds a way to come up short. And I think a big reason why is because of the defense. It's usually a sturdy, solid unit under Sean McDermott, but it did experience a little bit of slippage last year. They were 11th in points, 17th in yards, 29th on third down, 16th in the red zone, but they were also third in takeaways. So they're definitely not a team that's just going to be a doormat to a lot of these legit contenders. They signed Joey Bosa in the offseason to a one-year deal. That's pretty much the Von Miller replacement. But to be quite honest, I don't really think that's too much of an upgrade. He had 5 sacks in just 4 games, 5 sacks in 14 games, while Von Miller had 6 last year. I feel like you're just, it's not really addition by subtraction, to be quite honest with you. I feel like you just replaced Von Miller with another Von Miller caliber player. 2 guys that were outstanding in their primes, but are just not the same again. And if you look at the rest of their pass rush, it's a pretty starless rotation. Greg Rousseau, obviously their best player, had 8 sacks. 8 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 24 quarterback hits, 16 tackles for loss. But the whole Bills front four as a whole tied for 18th in sacks with 39. There were 26 in blitz percentage, and they were 12th in pressure percentage. They brought in Michael Hoyt, but he's obviously suspended, so he's going to miss some time. I like AJ Epinesa. He's, developed into a pretty quality defensive end. 6 sacks, 11 quarterback hits. Obviously, you got Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones plugging up the middle. So, I don't really know if that number is going to change, to be quite honest with you. I think Greg Rousseau is definitely going to have more than 8 sacks this year, but really, you're just hoping that everybody else can, make a reliable impact, or a decent impact, I should say, and, generate the pressure they need just so, the secondary here isn't on its heels for the entire day, every single week. Another big reason why I think the defense is a very big unit to, keep your eyes focused on is because their linebacking room, their 2 starting linebackers, Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard, they have not been healthy for the last couple of seasons. Matt Milano only played 4 games, yet still had 3 sacks, a few forced fumbles, 29 tackles. Terrell Bernard only played 13 games, but still totaled 104 tackles. And Dorian Williams in each of their places had an outstanding season, if you ask me. 117 tackles and 11 starts. And I think Joe Andreessen, Buffalo Joe, as they like to call him in the Hard Knocks series, he's a very likable guy. He still has a lot to polish and a lot to clean up, but I think if you give him more time and if you give him more reps, a better chance to develop, he's definitely going to get a lot more playing time. So hopefully he makes the best out of the opportunities that he's given. I already mentioned the secondary. It was okay. It wasn't great. It wasn't perfect, but they brought back Tre'Davious White. I'll be honest, I don't know if he's going to have that starting spot for long, just because last year was so rough for him, trying to come back from the injuries and not really having the same impact that he did, in 2019 and 2020 and 2021. If you remember, he's coming off 2 season-ending knee injuries. He had the torn ACL in 21, and then you had the Achilles just a couple years later. So, obviously the Bills, welcomed him back with open arms, and rightfully so. But you really don't know what type of player you're going to get for him. And that's why they drafted Maxwell Hairston in the first round. So that way he could bring in that same impact. But I think the number 1 corner is going to be Christian Benford, because if it wasn't him, if he didn't get hurt in the conference championship game, I don't know if the outcome would have been different, but I know that the defense would have been in a little bit of a better shape than what it was when, Mahomes carved them up. 82.6 passer rating, 10 passes defended, 2 interceptions. Not the best numbers, but they're better than anybody else that you could really count on in this quarterback rotation. So that even includes Taron Johnson, who's definitely their best nickelback. 78.9 rate, 2 interceptions, 65 tackles. I like the safety depth. Taylor Rapp is a guy that I've always liked dating back to his days with the Rams. Damar Hamlin, they mentioned his story on Hard Knocks, and in-ear brought a tear to my eye just because of, how emotional and how impactful it was, not just to the Buffalo Bills, but just to the entire NFL community at large. So he is actually coming off a really solid season with a 73.2 rate allowed and 2 picks, but it looks like Colt Bishop is working his way up the depth chart. And I like him, second-year player coming out of Utah. So it's a really stacked safety rotation. But at the same time, it's just when it comes to those tough, critical matchups, they cannot allow themselves to break down at the worst possible time, especially if they're going up against Kansas City again in the playoffs. And it's not just to them. You're going to go up against Lamar Jackson, possibly Joe Burrow. Houston, I think you have a better chance of beating just because, they got a lot of flaws on both sides of the ball. But the point is, the only team that could really beat this team is themselves. And I'll be honest, when I was watching Hard Knocks, I was surprised that there wasn't a lot more urgency and a lot more, passion and firepower. But at the same time, it works for them. They're building a foundation. They're building a winning culture. And I think if you're in Sean McDermott's shoes, you don't really need to have everybody tighten up and, not be themselves, because all that's going to do is just create more turmoil, and it's going to result in more losses than victories. So I have no problem with it whatsoever. But at the same time, it's put up or shut up for this team. Josh Allen has already won an MVP. They've been in the conference championship multiple times. They've proven that they can take these teams down to the wire and make them play at, make them beat them at their very best. But the only thing they haven't done is hoist the Lombardi trophy. And there's a reason why HBO has inserted, the 4 straight Super Bowl loss footages in each and every episode. I mean, it's only 2, but still, there's a reason why they do that. And it's because Buffalo has been waiting too damn long for a championship to arrive in their city. They have the best fan base in the NFL, and I don't think it's even close. And I'm saying this as a Patriots fan. It's hard not to like this team, but the only team that's actually beating them, besides the Kansas City Chiefs, is themselves. And until they finally get over that hump, then all that's going to do is just, create more what-if scenarios. So I'm going to leave it at that, and we'll move on to the next team here. Let's talk about the Miami Dolphins, who are honestly more frustrating to watch just because they have so much talent and have so much, experience on both sides of the ball, yet they always just stumble into complete mediocrity. I mean, you could talk about Tua's injuries, the concussion and the hip injury that sidelined him in the final few games of the season and say, oh, that's the reason why they didn't make the playoffs. But even when he was on the field, the flaws were just extremely glaring. And if they have one more season where they underachieve or they get bounced down in the first round or they miss it entirely, then not only are McDaniel and Chris Grier going to get fired, but there's a possibility that it'll happen in the middle of the season. Because, as much as I like McDaniel, his personality, how he's been able to connect with his players, there does come a time where if you just do the same things over and over again and you don't get different results, the locker room gets exhausted. They get worn down and you start to lose them. And that's something that nobody wants to happen at all. And more importantly, if you look at their cap situation for next season, they're going to be about $6-7 million over the cap. And it might just come to a point where they might have to let go of several key pieces. They already did that with Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith, and that's why their secondary isn't as big of a mess as they're in right now. But we'll get into that in just a couple minutes. Already talked about Tua Tagovailoa. His health is the biggest X factor every single year for obvious reasons. Number one, because, he's just suffered his 4th concussion in the last 3 seasons, and one more could potentially jeopardize not just his career, but his entire life as well. if you're Tua Tagovailoa, you got to make sure that you play every single game this year. But more importantly, you got to make sure that your health is at the utmost importance. I know that goes without saying, but the league is better when Tua Tagovailoa is in it. Without him, that offense just goes absolutely nowhere. I'm dead serious. When he's on the field, they look like a top 10, 15 unit. At some games, they look like a top 3 unit. Just look at a couple of years ago when they were playing against a bunch of bottom feeders. But when you saw the Dolphins with Tyler Huntley, Skylar Thompson, Tim Boyle, dramatically different. That's why at the end of the Jets loss last year, Tyreek Hill's like, yeah, no, I want out. I need a chance to compete, which he was obviously wrong for, by the way, and he dropped out of that request a few weeks later. But that's the type of frustration and that's the type of envy that a lot of Dolphins fans have generated because their franchise quarterback that is getting paid over $50 million a year, by the way, is not on the football field. And even with the amount of speed that offense has, his presence, Tua's presence, is extremely crucial to their success. They got an outstanding lead back in Devon Achane, who is not only a great what's the right word for it? He's not really a downhill back, but when you hand him the ball, whether it's in shotgun or up the center, he can make a lot of magic happen. He rushed for 907 yards. He totaled 12 touchdowns. He's just as capable, if not more of a deadlier threat as a receiving back with 592 receiving yards, 4.5 yards per carry. He is, he's definitely going to be a huge focal point of their offense. And he's got a couple decent compliments in Jalen Wright, third-year guy out of Tennessee, Ollie Gordon. He's going to be more of their downhill back. He's a rookie out of Oklahoma State. I've always loved watching him. Unfortunately, no more Alexander Mattison. He is on season-ending injury reserve due to a neck injury he suffered in the preseason. But, Mike Boone could always be at least a decent presence if he even makes the active roster. The wide receiving core, again, speed, athleticism, explosion. They have the talent for it. Tyreek Hill, he didn't even have 1,000 yards last season, but he still put up quality numbers. 81 catches, 959 yards. Jalen Waddle, a little bit of a season that he did the last year was the first season he had without 1,000 yards, only 2 touchdowns. So he's definitely expecting a bigger bounce back season. And I think a lot of that just has to do with the fact that, Tua wasn't on the field for most of it. But one of the biggest surprises by far was not trading away Jonnu Smith to Pittsburgh, but getting Darren Waller to come out of retirement. I'll be quite honest. At first, my initial reaction was like, wow, okay, Darren Waller is going to put the microphone down for about a few weeks or a few months and, try to make his return to the field. But one of the biggest reasons why he retired was just the fact that he couldn't stay healthy in the final, 2 seasons with the Raiders and then, the 1 year he had with the Giants. A lot of it was because of a hamstring injury that just kept lingering. And they're the most finicky ones that nobody can figure out how to solve or to completely make go away. And if Darren Waller can't be good to go, then if you look at their tight end room, it's not so great. They lost Durham Smythe. Obviously, I already talked about Jonnu Smith going away. And, listen, Julian Hill is okay. Same thing with Farrell Brown. But the tight end room or the lack of a security blanket was a big reason why, the Dolphins offense didn't have that same oomph or that same firepower as they did the year before. But one more thing I do want to say before I get to the offensive line is that if Tua does get hurt, whatever the injury may be, I'm not wishing on it. I'm knocking on wood that he has another healthy season, but I'm sure Dolphins fans don't want to see Zach Wilson suit up for them at all. They would rather have Quinn Ewers, who was drafted in the 6th round and had a pretty subpar season at college, despite, making it to the playoffs. They'd rather see Quinn Ewers try to win games for the Dolphins than Zach Wilson, because I hate to say it, all hope is lost for that guy. That's all I'm going to say. Well, let's get to the offensive line. It's definitely an inconsistent bunch. They're okay at their best, but they're not great. They lost Teron Armstead to retirement, so they drafted Jonah Savanaya. I think that's how you say it. In the 2nd round, they're going to make him their starting left guard. The left tackle is what really concerns me because there's just absolutely no depth I mean, Larry Borum, he was absolutely awful in Chicago. Patrick Paul, I'll be quite honest, I haven't really watched a whole lot of him, so I don't know. The verdict is still on this position right here. And Austin Jackson, he's still, a pretty good right tackle. They gave him an extension for a reason, but Aaron Brewer at center and James Daniels at right guard, I don't really know. I feel like they're going to have moments where they show promise, but then there are going to be a lot more plays where they're like, okay, this is really not working. So I know Tua is a guy that likes to get rid of the ball quickly. They really try to implement the run as well, but I'm the O line is always a concern. It's not a glaring concern, but it's one of those units where you just don't really know which direction they're going to head in this year. The defense, on the other hand, oh boy, this is not going to be a fun group to watch. And the biggest reason why is because they have little to no depth in two of the three levels. Let's just start with their pass rush. Bradley Chubb has not played in 2 years because of a torn ACL. Jalen Phillips only played what? Let me look at my notes here. He only played 4 games because of another season-ending knee injury. They're extremely talented and explosive when they're on the field, but you just don't know if they're going to stay on the field. And that's something that nobody ever wants to see happen. And if you look at the rest of it, I mean, you got Chop Robinson, had a promising rookie season, 6 sacks, 14 quarterback hits. Zach Sealer, an underrated defensive tackle, 10 quarterback takedowns, 19 hits, 13 tackles for loss. But they drafted Kenneth Grant in the first round, the big defensive tackle out of Michigan, but there's little to no depth anywhere else. I mean, Jones, not the veteran Jordan Phillips, the rookie Jordan Phillips, Mohamed Kamara. If this group cannot stay healthy, especially this guy and this guy. I mean, Chop Robinson, he just got hurt yesterday. He was carted off. Fortunately, it's nothing serious, but, that's just when the report came out, you're like, oh, God, how many more pieces are we going to lose this offseason? It's just the fact that, Anthony Weaver, he's entering his second year as the defensive coordinator, showed promise and flashes last year, but this is really a huge challenge for him. And if they keep losing any more of their starters, then it's going to be one of the worst defenses in the league. And I'm not exaggerating. The linebacking room, I'm not really concerned about. I mean, Jordan Brooks, it was a big reason why. 143 tackles. Tyrell Dodson started off with Seattle, if I'm not mistaken, then got traded over to the Dolphins at the deadline. Foley had 107 tackles, 2 sacks, 6 passes defended. So they're going to do their business in the run game. Let me look at my notes here. They were 12th in yards per carry, 9th in yards per game. Defense overall, they were 10th in points allowed, 4th in yards per game, 7th on third down, 4th in the red zone. Hasn't been completely perfect, but the run defense, I'm not completely worried about, especially since, you got more depth in that position than anywhere else. Willie Gay Jr., always a respectable presence, with the Kansas City Chiefs and New Orleans, and now jumping over to Miami. KJ Brett, pretty much traveling, 4 hours out of the way from Tampa Bay to South Beach. So I think I'm okay there. The secondary, though, that's where, giant alarm bells should be ringing. Because it's not just the fact that they traded away Jalen Ramsey, but they lost their best nickel back, Kader Kuhu, to a season-ending knee injury. Artie Burns, who was more than likely going to get starting reps, tore his ACL. They brought back Minkah Fitzpatrick, which is great, bringing back, a former draft pick, but he's coming off a down year. 126 rating allowed despite having, a few interceptions. They signed Jack Jones. He's always at least, a capable presence. Not a terrible corner, not great. 108.9 rating allowed, 16 passes defended, 3 interceptions, but 9 touchdowns allowed. I mean, you're really counting on 2 unproven and inexperienced guys in Storm Duck and Kendall Sheffield be your 2 starting corner, and that might change, as the preseason goes on. Mike Hilton, they brought him to be their nickelback, it looks like, but he's not really the guy from Pittsburgh or Cincinnati that's, going to be, a ball hawking blitzer that can, get his hands on the football. I mean, I'd be pleased if he could get like 3 to 4 picks, but really know if he's good enough anymore to put up those types of numbers. So my bottom line for the Miami Dolphins is this has to be the year where they just crush all those negative narratives and actually make something out of themselves. Instead of looking like soft, overrated pretenders, I want you to actually show that you can hold your ground against some of the best teams in the league. You haven't beaten Buffalo in who knows how long. One that, hasn't come down to a boneheaded last second play. You get crushed in the playoffs, whenever you do get that chance. You got blown out by the Kansas City Chiefs twice a couple years ago. And when you do play in the cold, you look like you can't handle the freezing weather for 2 minutes, let alone 5 or 60. So it really just comes down to culture. It comes down to accountability. It comes down to leadership. It really comes down to, how you interact with each other and how you play together as a team more than who you're going up against. That's my biggest concern with the Miami Dolphins this season. I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs, to be quite honest with you, but they have the talent to do it. You just have to finally get out of your own heads and show that, no, this is a team that, everybody should look out for. There you go. Bottom line. All right, next up, let's move on to the New Jersey Jets here and look at their depth chart because Aaron Rodgers experiment was an absolute disaster. It got the head coach fired, it got the general manager fired, and once again, they are starting over with Aaron Glenn as their head coach, Darren Mohe as the general manager. But this time, when it came to a quarterback, they didn't really go all in for a huge free agent acquisition, nor did they, draft a highly touted quarterback. They actually went with the middle route. They signed Justin Fields to a 2-year deal. Honest evaluation on Justin Fields. I really like him. I loved him, coming out of the draft at Ohio State. I was really stoked when the Chicago Bears traded up to get him, even though it did cost them a first-round pick. But with Justin Fields, you're getting average performances. Shows a lot of flashes that can tell you, oh, wow, this guy can really make it in this league. But he has a really low ceiling. And that has been the frustrating knock on his entire career. Can win you some games, but not every game. He's 31, and actually, I don't even know what his starting record is, but it's not even. I know it's not, completely satisfactual or not the one that you really want to see as a former first-round pick. So, again, not great, not terrible, not going to take you to a Super Bowl, but not bad enough to get you a top 5 pick. Just average play, and MetLife Stadium, he's going to have a first-year offensive coordinator in Tanner Amstrad, the former passing game coordinator with the Detroit Lions. So, fortunately for both of them, they got plenty of talent to work with. Garrett Wilson obviously just got paid a huge contract extension. Last year had over 100 catches, 1,100 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns, 1,000 yards in every season. He is more than proven to be one of the best receivers in the league. He just hasn't had, A, the success, and be, the right quarterback to throw him the football, just like a certain Terry McLaurin, who is currently holding out with the Washington Commanders. But that's a whole different issue right there. My biggest question when it comes to the receiving core is who's going to be the second option? I mean, Josh Reynolds, he's more familiar with the scheme that Angstrom wants to run. Alan Lazard, I mean, he didn't have a terrible season, had 6 touchdown receptions. Malachi Corley, he's entering his second year. Arian Smith, heck, maybe it's the rookie tight end, Mason Taylor, the guy that they drafted out of LSU in the second round. So that question definitely needs to be answered quickly, especially when you don't have the most inspiring quarterback room. But one thing that I think the Jets offense will rely upon a lot is their running game. That was something that Ben Johnson did a lot in Detroit with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. And I think Enstrom wants to carry that same philosophy and mindset over to the I want to say Hudson Harbor because that is what separates MetLife Stadium from New York City. But I'll just say East Rutherford. Let's just leave it at that. But they have 2 promising, capable backs in Breece Hall and Braylon Allen. I know there were some rumors that said that the Jets are super high on Braylon Allen and they might trade Hall at the deadline. I'm not buying that quite yet because I think Breece Hall is the number 1 back on any team in the National Football League. So I think the Jets would be absolutely foolish if they underutilized him or shipped him off in any way possible or at any point in the season. The offensive line, I think, got a lot better than it did last year. And this is with Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses as your starting tackles from the year before. But obviously, both of them are gone. They drafted Armand Membu with their first overall pick, the right tackle out of Missouri. Ola Fashanu, he's going to thrust his way into the starting left tackle spot. Coming off a pretty solid rookie season. The interior, in my opinion, is definitely the biggest strength in this front five. John Simpson coming off a strong year with the Ravens. Joe Tippmann established himself as the starting center, so we don't really have to watch the turnstile known as Josh Myers. And then Elijah Vera-Tucker had a healthy season last year, and that was absolutely incredible, and that was something that I was really happy to watch. So I think offensively, they definitely have the talent, but once again, Justin Fields is your biggest X factor, and more importantly, you got to figure out, who's going to be the guy to throw it to when this guy's double covered or isn't open enough. So defensively, Eric Glenn is going to do his best to get that unit on track. It was already in a great situation when Robert Saleh was a head coach, but when he got fired and Jeff Ulbrich took over, you could just sense there was a little bit of a dip in production and definitely a drop-off. Still finished with, promising statistics. They were 11th in passer rating, 8th in yards per attempt, 7th in completion percentage, 4th in passing yards per game, 4th in rush yards per carry, 17th in rush yards per game, 43 sacks, 13th in blitz percentage, 7th in pressure percentage. So these are promising numbers. It's just the fact that, after 5 games, the best you really got from the Jets defense were just pretty good performances. Not great, but just pretty good. But fortunately for Aaron Glenn, the core is still intact. You got Quinton Williams coming off a promising Pro Bowl season, 6 sacks, 18 quarterback hits. Will McDonald, after only having 3 sacks a couple years ago, had 10 last year, or 10 and a half, I should say, with 24 quarterback hits. Easily a breakout season for him. I seriously doubt that Byron Coward is going to be one of their starting defensive tackles. I'm a Patriots fan, and he was a former 5th-round pick, and he did not do anything to prove that he was a starting caliber player. So it's more likely going to go to the veteran Derek Nottie. That's just me. But I think a huge win for the Jets defense is getting Jermaine Johnson back from a torn Achilles. He was fully clear to return to practice. Obviously, we'll see if he's good enough to go for week 1 or fully good enough to go week 1. But even if that's not the case, you got Michael Clements, who is more than definitely proven to be a starting quality, edge rusher. 4.5 sacks last year and 17 starts. So this D-line definitely has some depth. And the linebacking room is just as great. The run defense hasn't been, exactly to the standard where it needs to be, but Quincy Williams had 116 tackles with 4 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries, and 14 tackles for loss. While Jamian Sherwood not only led the league in solo tackles with 98, but had 158 total tackles overall, along with a couple of sacks. So, really, this run defense just needs more size, and it needs more grit. And more importantly, it's just like getting a rebound in basketball. You need to have that desire and have that passion to say, yeah, no, you're not getting in our trenches anytime soon. So, once you get that taken care of, then the secondary can really take off. Obviously, it was a little bit of a weakness for Eric Glenn when it came to his defenses in Detroit. A lot of big reasons why, the Lions defense wasn't as great the first couple or 3 seasons in Detroit was because of a brittle secondary. So I'm just hoping that the Jets do not run into that same trap. But one thing that he has now that he didn't really have in Detroit was a number 1 corner. And that's what you're getting with Sauce Gardner coming off a solid season, a Pro Bowl season, 83.3 rate, 9 passes defended with an interception. But a big loss was losing DJ Reed to, ironically, the Lions and replacing him with Brandon Stevens, who is really just a liability. I do not trust him at all to be the second corner. I feel like a lot of opposing offenses are going to pick on him a lot. So hopefully he can prove us all wrong. Actually, not hopefully for me, just because of the AFC East rivalry. But the Jets also have one of the best, if not the best, slot corner in the league in Michael Carter II. Had a higher passer rating allowed than he did last year, or the year before, I should say. But It was an 81.5, so it's still a pretty good number. It's not great, and it doesn't really show that you're a lockdown corner, but it's still, a solid number that, most corners want to be at in this league. As for the safety room, I would say it's anywhere between pretty good to, this group can get picked on if, opposing offenses decide to go deep. Tony Adams, I like him a lot. I think he's got a lot of potential in him, but he did allow a rate over 100. And Andre Sisco is not coming off a great year with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's okay, but, I don't really think that he's a guy that, you're going to count on every time. He can get his hands on the ball, sure, but in coverage, you still have there's still a lot there that, needs to be desired. So I think for the Jets, there's not going to be too many expectations for them. I know their fans are going to be deluded like they always are and say, oh, no, this team is going to make the playoffs again. We have the pieces. But we hear that every single year. They go after the big names, whether it's, the sexy head coach or the nice wide receiver or the, recognizable corner, whatever the case may be. And then the actual season starts and they just fall right back into the same Sarlacc pit all over again. They finish anywhere between 4 to 6 wins, and, their fans are left sad, and Fireman Ed just wants to cry into a bucket of fried chicken. So they'll find a way to screw it up like they've always done in years past. I mean, I like the pieces that they have, but you just need to make sure that, A, the defense gets back on track, B, that Justin Fields shows progress and promise, and C, you got to make sure that this passing game really opens up. If they could do that, then I think they'll be okay, and I think there will be a little bit of hope left in the future. But who am I kidding? This is the New York Jets. It's like telling me that someone else is going to be a better songwriter than Taylor Swift. So I don't know why that was the first thought that came to mind, but you get my point. Oh, and by the way, Nick Folk's back. 42, but nostalgia, am I right? Let's get on to the final team, the one that I really wanted to talk about all along, and that is the New England Patriots. I'll be brutally honest, and I'm going to open myself up to the few people that are watching here. The last 2 years have been the most frustrating and the most depressing seasons of football I have watched in my entire life. I mean, I thought it would be over after Belichick was fired. I really thought Gerard Mayo would be a breath of fresh air, but he turned out to be even worse. He never took accountability for himself. He threw a lot of, his players and even some assistants under the bus for stuff that was partially his own fault. They weren't winning. They still had the same amount of losses. And more importantly, the roster looked even worse than what it did when, Belichick departed. So now that Mayo's gone and that Mike Vrabel's taken over, hope has finally been restored. They entered the offseason with the most cap space in the league, and they did everything they could to make sure that this season will not be a complete disaster. One big reason why Drake May finally has some help. If you look at this offense, it is absolutely 10 times different compared to what it was last year. They still have Mondre as the starting back, but he's coming off a very bad season that was plagued by a lot of fumbles. So that is why they drafted Travion Henderson in the second round. They have him listed as the second stringer for now, but if you watched him in the first preseason game against the Washington Commanders, that you could just tell that the ceiling is there and the hype is there. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what he could do once the regular season starts. They signed Stephon Diggs to a 3-year deal to be the wide receiver number 1, but it's a little bit of a risky signing because he is coming off a torn ACL. So you just hope that he doesn't lose too much strength or too much physical ability, because when he is on the field, he is still one of the best receivers in the league, and he proved that he can prove that he can still play at a high level. Brought in Matt Collins as an additional depth piece, but honestly, that doesn't mean that their homegrown players aren't complete scrubs. I mean, Demario Douglas, he is always a guy that, can make a lot of damage happen when he has the ball in his hands. Kayshon Boutte coming off a much better season than he did in his rookie year. So he's definitely going to get a lot more playing time. They drafted Kyle Williams, the speedster out of Stanford, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think it's Stanford. One of the fastest 40-yard dashes in the combine last season. definitely, is working his way up the depth chart, but I think the one unsung player that I think could establish himself as the next Julian Edelman, excuse me, Julian Edelman, Danny Amendola, Wes Welker, Efton Chisholm. He's an undrafted rookie free agent out of Eastern Washington. Had an outstanding senior year in which he broke every single school record that was previously held by Cooper Kupp. Now, obviously, I'm not going to go on a stretch and say, oh, he's going to have, the best rookie season of all time. I'm definitely not going to go there, but if he works his way up the depth chart and, gets that opportunity to shine and, makes the most out of his chances, then I think a lot of Patriots fans are going to, buy his jersey. I think that, it's going to get sold out at a lot of Patriots stores. That's all I'm going to say. The tight end room is still pretty decent. You got Hunter Henry, still a reliable security blanket. They brought back Austin Hooper. But I love that this offensive line got overhauled. Drafted Will Campbell with the 4th overall pick. I mean, Cole Strange coming back from a torn patellar tendon. He's more likely going to be the starting left guard. But Jarrett Wilson might have something to say about that. I know he's listed as the center or the 3rd string center, but he could play guard as well. And I think, Josh McDaniels, who's coming back for a 3rd stint, there might be a possibility in which Jarrett Wilson might overtake that starting spot. But we'll see what happens there. I mean, they drafted Layden Robinson last year, who had a pretty rough rookie year. So I think it's definitely going to be a competition between those three. And at the center position, you got Garrett Bradbury. Great run blocker, just not well in pass protection, but they give him a minimum 2-year deal. So I'm not completely upset at the terms or the contract terms. Brought in Morgan Moses to be the right tackle. Obviously, a proven veteran, someone that is still playing at a solid level. And that allows Michael Wenu to move into his natural position at right guard. So offensively, it already looks a lot better. Defensively, they're even better because that is what New England prioritized during free agency. They signed Milton Williams to an exorbitant contract, had 5 sacks with the Philadelphia Eagles last year, got a Super Bowl ring as a result. Robert Spillane, he's going to be the new plug at middle linebacker. 158 tackles. He will replace Jawan Bentley, who was just recently released. You pair him with Jelani Tavai, along with Christian Ellis, who they brought back on a contract extension. Run defense was not great last year. They were 23rd in rush yards per game. Sorry, I was trying to look through here. 23rd in rush yards per game. And when Bentley tore his pec in the second game of the season, that side of the ball completely fell off a cliff. So I'm so happy that they brought some stability back. And they also signed Harold Landry to a pretty good contract. Had 9 sacks. He reunites with Mike Vrabel. And Christian Barmore, only 4 games played last year, returning from blood clots. When he's fully healthy, 2 years ago, he had 8 sacks. And showed that second-round pedigree, the near first-round pedigree that he had when he was coming out of the 2021 draft from the University of Alabama. Secondary, I think that is definitely going to be a huge improvement as well. Christian Gonzalez coming off a second-team All-Pro season, a 69.3 passer rating with 2 interceptions and 16 passes defended. This kid is a legit superstar, but he's not going to get the same amount of love as Derek Stingley or Patrick Surtain or Marlon Humphrey or Denzel Ward. But in my opinion, this guy will be a top 2 cornerback at the end of the year. And I know that's the Patriot fan of me saying this, but I also don't feel the same way. But I also feel like it's not, because that kid is a stud, yet he's not getting the same amount of love as the other guys that I just mentioned. And another reason why I think the secondary is going to be better is because they signed a perfect complement in Carlton Davis. Suffered a fractured jaw last year with the Lions, missed a lot of time in the regular season, but before he got hurt, has had a 79.8 passer rating and still showed that, he is a perfectly capable shutdown corner that, can find a way to make plays and make sure that some of the best receivers in the game are getting slowed down. So you got those two paired together at corner. Kyle Duggar is coming off probably the worst season that he's had as a New England Patriot. There's a reason why he's practicing with the second team, but you're just hoping that he can regain his confidence back. Jabril Peppers only played 6 games last year, so the safety room is fine. And, you got, some rising depth pieces like Hawkins and Del Pettis. I don't really know, to be quite honest, if those two are going to make like a huge impact, but it's one room of concern that it's one position group that I don't have a lot of room of concern for. And you got Marcus Jones playing in the slot. Not just an incredible dynamic returner, but a pretty good corner, an 86.4 passer rating allowed. So not that bad. When I look at this Patriots roster, literally every single player from the old Belichick regime to the Super Bowl dynastic era is gone. David Andrews, Juwan Bentley, Dietrich Wise, Jonathan Jones, Devon Gottschalk, even Joe Cardona were all told, yeah, we don't really need you anymore. So this team, in my opinion, definitely has the pieces to make the playoffs. I personally think they're going to be a playoff team just because Drake May has weapons around him and the defense is back to form. And Mike Vrabel is one hell of a coach. And, they're trying to, reestablish a winning culture and try to just make sure that the last 2 years never even happened in the first place. But I think what's holding a lot of people back from that possibility is that we actually have to see this team in action first before we come to a final conclusion. I don't think they're going to win the division, but I think they're going to be a surefire wildcard team. So let me move over to the tier list and place these teams in their respective categories. So I will say this. Yesterday, we talked about the NFC West. Obviously, I told you that I think the 49ers will win the division. The Rams will be in as a wildcard team. Cardinals will have an okay season, and the Seahawks will just be in that purgatory slate. Let's go. Let's see where we could put the AFC East teams in, shall we? I'll start with the Miami Dolphins. I think they are going to go 7-10 this year. I think they're going to be in the and not good category because A, they don't do well against legitimate opponents. B, their defense is an absolute turnstile right now. And C, when the offense goes up against quality teams, they look like the New York Jets, which is saying a lot because they have so much talent and so much firepower and explosion. And to be quite honest, like I said, if you're just doing the same things over and over, but don't get a different result or get the same result, it gets tiring, it gets exhausting, and all that does is create more turmoil and drama. So unless the Dolphins can finally prove that they're no longer that team, then that's where I'm going to place them. The Buffalo Bills, they're legit contenders. They're going to go 13-4 in my opinion. I think they'll have the best record in the AFC. Obviously, I could be wrong just because you've got the Chiefs and the Ravens in that same conversation. But the Bills are going to be one of those teams that is going to be talked about when it comes to who's going to win the AFC or who's going to take down the Kansas City Chiefs. The New England Patriots, I know I'm biased, but I'm putting them in the 12-win category. They're not winning the division. They are not winning the division. But if you look at their schedule and if you look at their improved roster, you can tell that this is a team that you got to look out for. And I'm really excited to watching them. I mean, obviously, they blew out the Commanders in the preseason. They didn't play any of their starters. I get it. But it just showed the type of promise and the potential that they have for this upcoming year. So I'm looking forward to it for sure. And then lastly, the New Jersey Jets. I got to put them in the and not good category, to be quite honest. There's a possibility they could elevate into this one, but I got to be honest. Like, Justin Fields doesn't inspire a whole lot of confidence. The offense has talent, but you still need some question marks that need to be answered. And the defense has to show that, they can return to what they were under Saleh a couple years ago, which was the only reason why they were even competitive in the first place. So there you go. Number 1, Patriots 2, Dolphins 3, Jets 4. I think the Jets will go 6-11, Dolphins 7-10, Patriots 12-5, Bills 13-4. And before we wrap this one up, let's see which division we are going to preview tomorrow. The NFC South, perfect. So to any of the pessimistic Saints fans, the boastful Buccaneers fans, the very sad Falcons fans, and the surprisingly hopeful Carolina Panthers fans, then check this episode out tomorrow because it is going to be a whole lot of fun. Thank you all so much for watching, everybody. Make sure you like and subscribe for additional content. Definitely be back tomorrow afternoon to preview the third out of the 8 divisions in the National Football League. And it was sure of a hell of a fun time getting to talk football with all of you. I know, these episodes have been a lot shorter than they've been in years past, so I'm actually really happy for that. But thanks for stopping by